Hello, this is Eric Lee from Labor Start. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Hello, working people of Southwest Washington.
You're listening to episode 44 of Working to Live in Southwest Washington, produced by the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council. Like the bumper you heard at the top of the show says, we're also a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 radio shows and podcasts for working people just like you. Find out more about the network at laborradionetwork.org. I'm Harold Phillips. And before we get started, we want to remind you that the views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily the views and opinions of the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council, its affiliate unions, our guests' unions or employers, not even the pier at the Vancouver waterfront. Nobody's but theirs. Now that we've got that over with, we're less than a month away from Election Day, and I know, you're getting so tired of hearing about what's happening on the national stage. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you should tune out and not pay attention to what's happening in the presidential race. But I am going to suggest that there may just be some other elections taking place right here in our own community that are very important and might just have a bigger effect on your daily life than whatever happens in the other Washington. One of those races is for Clark County Council. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know who's currently on the Clark County Council, who's running in this election, or even what the county council does. To help fix that, we've got Will Fuentes, who's running in District 3 for the Clark County Council. Thanks so much for joining us, Will.
Harold, thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for listening. I really, really appreciate the time.
Now, Will, before we get into what the county council is, I just want to take a step back. You're running in District 3, right? Where is the 3rd County Council district? What's that like?
Yes, so I am running for Clark County Council District 3. District 3 is geographically the smallest district in all of Clark County. For those of you familiar with the area, it is bounded by the 205 on the west, 192nd on the east, the Columbia River on the south, and 4th Plain Boulevard up north. So geographically, again, it is a small district.
But it's generally speaking an urban district. Is that right, Will? I know that Clark County is actually much bigger than just Vancouver, even though a lot of people don't think of it as such.
That is correct. The 3rd district is primarily East Vancouver. And yes, Clark County is more than just Vancouver. Vancouver makes roughly about 38-39% of the county's population.
So as you're going around knocking on doors, talking to your constituents, you're talking to folks who are living in an urban environment. But when you get onto the council, you're going to have to actually deal with things that happen in, say, Battleground or out to the east, entirely different environments. What sort of things have you done to prepare to not only represent the members of the 3rd district, but also help with the entirety of Clark County?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And you're absolutely right that decisions made at the county level don't just impact the urban core or the urban area, particularly Vancouver, that it impacts all of Clark County, all 800 plus square miles of Clark County. One of the things that I've done is I've connected with a number of organizations across the county to really listen, and understand what the needs and challenges are. A quick example, I had the pleasure this past weekend to go out with Sue Marshall, current counsel for the 5th district here in Clark County, and a couple community members, environmental community members who wanted to show us the Dabbler Forest, which is at risk of being logged if it gets sold by the Department of Natural Resources. I've been engaging with a lot of folks outside of my district to understand what those challenges are, including a few elected officials from the smaller communities across the county. I've been in conversations with the director of jail services as well. I just had a conversation with John Horsch, our county sheriff, to really understand what his thoughts are and his needs are, since the county is responsible for the sheriff's department. So I've been engaging with a lot of folks, a lot of conversations, more than anything listening, right? We have some major challenges coming up at the county.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, Will. This show speaks to the working people of Southwest Washington,
Mhm.
as well as working people who tune in from outside Southwest Washington. You don't even want to see our statistics. I mean, hello, Russia. Hello, Finland. Um, what are some of the issues that the working people who are living in the third district are telling you are important for you to deal with when you
Yeah.
get elected?
Yeah, housing. Housing is a major issue, but it's a critical issue not just in Vancouver, Clark County, or other jurisdictions across the county. It's a critical issue across the entire country, right? Folks are concerned. The rents have gone up dramatically. Vancouver, Clark County was once a bedroom community of the Portland metropolitan area, where if you wanted to find affordable housing or housing that was at reach for most people's pocketbook, they moved to Vancouver. In fact, that's the reason I moved to Vancouver, because I could afford a home here where I
Hmm.
couldn't do that in Washington County, Oregon, home of Intel, right? Massive Intel. And as a result, it started driving the prices up. And that's not the case anymore. Rents on average used to be lower in Vancouver versus Portland. That's not the case as of last year. As of last fall, according to a study done by the city of Vancouver, on average, rents were $100 more. That was just unheard
Really?
of 3 years ago.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is a big change.
Hmm. Yeah,
What's
it is a it
driving
is a
that, Will? I mean, what do you think is behind that?
yeah, well, there's a number of things. Folks are leaving Portland and Oregon across the river in droves, right? Including myself. A few years ago, as I mentioned, in order to afford a home that met my needs, I had to move to Vancouver, right? Fortunately, I did my due diligence and I fell in love with the community the first day I set foot in Vancouver. And so I'm very, very happy to be here and represent our community. I think primarily a number of other things, right? That drives housing, I think, across the nation is restrictive land use planning and zoning codes, not enough inventory, a generation, right? Millennials, kind of transitioning from that stage in their lives where they're young, they're going to college, and now they're wanting to start families and buy their homes, and there's just not enough inventory out there. And then, in our region, Portland, well, historically has been unaffordable, at least the last 10 years. And so Southwest Washington being the more affordable communities in the region, people started leaving Portland, started leaving Washington County, started leaving Clackamas and making their way across the river, where homes at one point were more affordable. And as a result, that put a lot of pressure on our housing inventory here in Southwest Washington, and it started driving up prices.
So, Will, you said that you recently moved to Clark County. What made you take the step of actually running for the county council?
Yeah, good question. So I've been here in the community almost 5 years. I don't know if it's recent or not, but it's some time. I lived in Oregon and Washington County primarily, and in Portland for a few years. I've been in the Pacific Northwest in the region for almost 17 years. I'm a transplant from California. I know, a lot of us are.
I could tell when you said the 205, just for the record.
That's the telltale sign, right? Yes, that's so funny. Yeah, it's a very Southern California thing. But I'll tell you one thing: I would never move back home to California. This is my home, and so why I decided to run here in Clark County is for a number of reasons, right? First of all, my skill set. I was a planning commission in the city of Hillsborough for 5 years, sat on the comprehensive plan steering committee for 2 years, right, where we helped kind of shape what the comp plan would look like for the next 20 years. Sat on a couple different housing committees, including the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, to really kind of analyze what the needs of the community was in terms of housing, and a couple of other committees. Transportation Steering Committee was the other important one. So I did it for quite some time. In addition, I have a degree in urban studies, community development from Portland State University. Got that as an adult. After moving here, working in community really for the last year and a half at an organization called Fourth Plane Forward, a nonprofit place-based organization, as I continue to engage with community and understand what the challenges and needs were, I started realizing that I wanted to have a really positive impact on my community, on the future of Clark County. This is where I'm setting root. This is where I intend to spend the rest of my life. So I'm not going anywhere else. And as a result, I want to shape what our future looks like, right? And the best way that I can do that is by serving the community on a large scale, right? And that's in an elected position. And that's what really drove me to want to represent the third district and to run for Clark County Council.
So that brings us to the big question, right? We've talked about some issues. We've talked about housing affordability. We've talked about logging. What is the Clark County Council? What can it do about these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in terms of housing, let's talk about that. Let's unpack that big topic. The county is responsible for land use planning in unincorporated Clark County. As of now, there are roughly 160,000 folks in unincorporated Clark County, right? Everybody else lives within a jurisdiction, whether it's Battleground, the city of Vancouver, Washougal, Camas, etc.
And not only that, but I think a lot of people who technically live in those communities, at least that's where you write the address on the envelope that you send them if you're living in the 20th century and do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Even though their address says Vancouver or
Mhm.
Battleground, they might still be living in unincorporated Clark County, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, if you share a boundary with the city of Vancouver or any other jurisdiction, battleground, most often you will probably use that zip code that is associated with the larger jurisdiction, right? Orchards is a really good example. So Fourth Plain Boulevard, where the district boundary ends up north, right across the street is Orchards, right? Most folks living within that vicinity will use Vancouver as a mailing address.
Even though technically they're not in Vancouver, they're in unincorporated Clark County. But you'd
Mhm.
never know it when you're driving around there. It looks just like it did across the street.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. I mean, I was just there talking to a small business owner. We're working on a project with them. This is not county related or anything. The organization that I work for is working on a little project to help increase customer base. But anyways, and they're right across the street from the city of Vancouver. But when I Google their address, it says the city of Vancouver. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So, how does this land use planning that you were talking about before come into play?
So one of the things that I propose, and this is through a lot of analysis, as I mentioned, sitting on a number of committees, the low income housing committee here in Clark County for the past year and a half. One of the culprits when it comes to not having enough inventory is restrictive zoning codes. A lot of the zoning codes that are on the books now, whether it's within a jurisdiction or in this case, unincorporated Clark County, were created 40, 50, 60 years ago, and they just don't adhere to today's reality, right? To the demand. This county is estimated to grow anywhere between 150 and 200,000 folks in the next 20 years. That is a lot of people in a very short period of time. And there's a couple of components here. If we want to preserve our open spaces, our natural environment, our farmland, we have to grow in a smart way. We have to do it in an orderly way. And the county has to ensure that there is enough land to grow, to build for the next 20 years. And what I'm proposing is zoning reform, right? So look at the existing zoning codes and allowing for more density in some of the neighborhoods that are in an unincorporated Clark County, particularly those that are adjacent to the city of Vancouver, right? Because they make up about 90,000 folks that live adjacent to the city of Vancouver's boundaries. And then allowing for increased density along some major corridors here in this part of the county, the 99, which goes from south to north. Part of that highway is in unincorporated Clark County. 112, also part of it is in unincorporated Clark County. So those parts that are in unincorporated Clark County, what I'm proposing is allowing for increased density. Why? Simple reason. There's access to public transportation. I think there's a big appetite for people to access public transportation, but in a region that's so low density, that's so spread out, it's very challenging for C-Tran, for example, to provide reliable service. And so we need to increase capacity. We need to increase density along those major corridors where those folks who want to ride a bike or a scooter or take the bus have access to that without having to own a car. Right now, not everybody needs a apartments. I recognize that I'm that one person who doesn't want to live in an apartment, right? Because I grew up and lived in an apartment for most of my life. I love the space that I have now with a little backyard and enough space for me to live. I propose moderate density in some of these neighborhoods where lots can range anywhere between 6 and 10,000 square feet. And if somebody wants to build a duplex or a triplex, the county allows them to. If somebody wants to build an ADU, they can do that. That's something that's not allowed right now. The city of Vancouver has passed some laws to allow for that, which, by the way, it's part of the GMA, the Growth Management Act, right? Ensuring that cities and municipalities and jurisdictions across the state allow for more increased density. We're gonna do it at some point. We just need to move a lot quicker.
So actually, that brings up a question that
Mhm,
popped into my mind as you were talking. You're talking about unincorporated Clark County,
mhm,
but
correct,
the city of Vancouver is part of Clark County.
correct.
So how does that work? Can
Mhm.
the Clark County Council suggest things to the city of Vancouver to enact? Does the city of Vancouver do its own thing and the Clark County Council does its own thing in unincorporated Clark County? What's the relationship there?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So the city of Vancouver has their own zoning codes, right? And so they kind of follow their rules. Unincorporated Clark County has their rules as well, their own zoning codes. So I think I mentioned earlier, the city of Vancouver is actually taking steps to increase density in some parts of the city and allowing for ADUs, right? So that's something that I believe it happened within the last couple of years. So they changed some of the zoning codes. Now we need to follow their lead. Clark County needs to follow their lead because we are behind. The state requires that that happens. We're just not doing it fast enough.
We're coming to the end of our time here, but if there was one message you wanted to leave the voters with as they get ready to fill out their ballots and get them in by November 5th, what would that be?
I obviously have an opponent in this race, right? But I think between both of us, I'm the one with extensive leadership experience. Most of my professional life has been in the private sector. I've recently transitioned on purpose to the nonprofit sector a little bit over a year ago. Best move I've ever made. And simple reasons because I get to work with community, right? I get to support folks who need it. So I have that experience, as I mentioned earlier. I'm a former planning commissioner for the city of Hillsborough. I've sat on a number of committees to really understand the issues and the impact that these issues are having on our community that's preventing us from owning our homes, that's preventing them from building us generational wealth. In addition, I'm a leader who leads with compassion and empathy. And I think that that's something that we don't find a lot out there, unfortunately. But also what's important is my leadership style, it's about collaboration, working together. You asked earlier about how do we work with the city bank? I mean, we build relationships, right? We build trust with community members. I have great connections with a number of community-based organizations already just in the year and a half that I worked at a nonprofit that I could tap into to collaborate with Clark County to address some of the issues like homelessness, right? Housing and environmental issues. And so that's a skill, and that's experience that I have that I don't believe my opponent does.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Will. Hey, if people want to find out more about you, more about that experience that you have, how would they do that?
Absolutely. So I encourage listeners to go to electwill.com. But just to be clear, it's will with one L. So it's ELECTWIL.com. You'll find a lot of information about my priorities and solutions that I'm offering. In addition, you'll see who's endorsed me, and there's contact information. You can email me and you can actually call and text me, and I will respond. Turnaround time within 24 hours if it's a text or an email. And if you call me, I'll try my best to answer the phone, but I do work full time, so I will get back to you as soon as I can.
I thought you looked tired, and here I thought it was just because you're in the final stretch of this election.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Will Fuentes, running for Clark County Council in the 3rd District.
Thank you, Harold. I really appreciate it. Have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, working people, for joining us on another episode of Working to Live in Southwest Washington, produced by the Southwest Washington Central Labor Council. And, folks, affordability, like Will was talking about, is so important, especially when your wages don't keep up with things like the cost of housing. One of the ways to make sure that doesn't happen is to have a strong union contract. The Southwest Washington Central Labor Council believes in having strong union contracts for all working people in our region, even podcast hosts like me. That's why This podcast was recorded under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. Remember, working people, this is your show. We want to know what you want to hear on it. Email us at podcast@swwaclc.org or find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SWWACLC. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, give us 5 stars or put your car on I-205, Californians, or whatever your podcast platform of choice gives you to let people know you like what we're doing here. One last thing, folks. Will just talked about how his style is collaboration. And it's kind of refreshing to hear someone who's running for office talk about how they want to collaborate in order to get things done. For so many years, we've heard people say that if you work with the other side, then you're a traitor to your side. You're working with the enemy. But when you think about the way that we get things done, nobody ever gets everything they want. You have to be able to work with other people to get the best result possible. Because chances are the other side isn't just going to lay down and say, okay, you win, you take it all. No, the other side of any argument, of any negotiation, is just as committed to what they want as you might be to what you want. And the only way you ever get past the deadlock, the only way you ever get things done, is by working together, is by engaging in that dirty word, compromising. I know, sometimes it doesn't feel great that you didn't get that one thing that you thought was really important. But if we let that one thing get in the way of getting anything done, well, guess what? Nothing gets done. There's this saying about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. The only way that people on the county council or the city council or the federal government can get anything done is if they don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If they can work together to find a solution that appeals to the most, then we can move on to the next problem. And trust me, there is always going to be a next problem. So look at the people who are willing to collaborate. Look at the people who are willing to work with the other people to find solutions. Because I don't know about you, I'm awfully tired of the deadlock. We'll see you soon.